My name is Chemutai Glasheen, and I'm so glad to be here today. I'm just thrilled and beyond thrilled because it's a real opportunity for me to be here to meet all of you and to talk about my book. So thanks everyone and welcome aboard, and let's have this conversation this afternoon. So I'm often asked why I wrote this, and it just as much as I should know by now why I wrote it, it's always a bit of a struggle to get it out there. But this is a long story. It's not this particular book, but I started off by writing a story in response to an unfortunate incident that happened when I went home to visit my family in Kenya. There was a bit of an upheaval following an election dispute, and it really got me thinking about my place in all of this. Um, the people who are most affected were the young people, and I'm a teacher. That's my background. I am surrounded by young people. I've been teaching for a long time. Taught English. I taught literature, and I've been in classrooms where I'm often discussing issues that arise. So when I first wrote uh, the story in response to that upheaval, I was writing about issues of displacement because there were so many people who were being displaced from their homes because of the violence that arose. But that story allowed me to process what I really felt, how I really felt about the issues. But when I finished writing that story, I felt like I was not finished. There was many more things I wanted to talk about. There was so many issues to be explored, and I also began to believe that I could write. I thought I could before, but after I wrote that, I would read the story and I think, yeah, this sounds really good. Maybe there's something in me. Maybe I can write. Okay, so that's a little bit of a background for me. Uh, I've got a daughter who's about 17. Hi there, Fremantle Press. Thank you so much. Fremantle Press are the ones who they brought this book to the world, and so I'm so grateful to Fremantle Press for helping me tell my stories and bring them to you. Hi, Caroline. Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in. Yes. Okay. So as I'm thinking about the Mao, this is a story. There are it is an anthology. There's 11 stories in here, and they're all Kenyan stories. Actually, mostly East African, because there's one story there that talks about Burundi, and there's mention of Tanzania. But it's mostly Kenyan. But I do like to think of them as African stories. My characters are Africans. The situations what mostly affects uh, our Kenyan people. So yeah, so I like to think of it as African stories, because when you think of what are African stories, sometimes it's not always easy to explain what that is. Hi Natalie, thanks for tuning in. Hi Sally, nice to meet you. Let me know where you're tuning in from. I'm tuning in from Perth as I'm getting to know you guys. So when I think about the Mao, one of the actually, let me begin with the reviews. I've had quite a few people say very nice things about me and about the stories, and I'm really, really grateful. Thank you to every single one of you who's taken the time to read the stories, who've taken the time to respond and give me some reviews, and that's been quite nice. Um, One of the things that surprised me, and I really didn't think about, was uh, many of you saying you're so grateful that we had a glossary as part of the book. When I was writing these stories, I had a very specific audience in mind. Like I said, I was thinking of a Kenyan classroom, how that would work. I'm from a large family, so I have so many nieces and nephews, and they could fill a classroom. And many times when I was writing, I'd imagine myself in a classroom with my nieces, with my nephews, and thinking about what kind of stories I want to share with them, what kind of discussions I want to talk about with them. And so thinking like that and writing about them, I'd go between English and Swahili and Kalenjin, because when you come from a culture that speaks more than one language, it's very natural to go between languages. And so when I was writing this with that audience in mind, I really wasn't. I was just flowing in between the languages that I could, and putting in a glossary only happened at the very end. So I've been quite, I think, surprised that that was an important part of it, because I took that for granted, because I was just thinking that's natural just to flow between the languages. Hi, Better Reading. Thanks for having me here. Hi, Diana. Thanks for letting me where you're from. I hope Melbourne is not too cold this time of the day. What was my favorite story to write? Hard to say. I have the ones that were my favorite that are my favorite to read, which is "I Am the Mouth," the title story. Mostly because when I was writing that, when it's based on an ongoing issue with the Mao is a forest in Kenya, quite big, and it's one of the biggest the biggest catchment area for water. And over years, it has gotten depleted. So in the move to try and reforestate that forest, the people who live there are the ones who've been most disadvantaged. They're the people who are indigenous to that place, and them being evicted out of the Mao is what really touched me, because it's part of a broader story. It's just not the gigs who are getting affected, but I see lots of these kinds of stories happening around the world, where indigenous people are getting the short end of everything because of big businesses trying to take over their places, mining industries, tourism, and all that. So so that was an interesting story for me. I enjoyed writing it because I learned so much in the process of reading about them, looking at the interviews, and even reading about other parts of the world that are going through similar things. So yeah, I'd say that was a good story to write. And I will admit, to date, it's one of the stories I enjoy reading the most. I find a sense of rhythm in that story that I didn't intend when I was writing, but it is there. So it's a beautiful one. Yes. So I say hi to you, Natalia. Thanks for tuning in. What other story did I like? There's a story called Kembo. It's a very fast one. It's about a young boy who has a mother with an intellectual disability. I drew that story from my own family, because we've got a member of the family who has an intellectual disability, and oftentimes I'd wonder about how people like her survived in the community. We were fortunate as a family because we could afford to look after her, but not everybody has um, that possibility. Not everybody can do that, and it's such times that you begin to think about people who are already in difficult situations, and when you have that added layer of disability, it can make it a really challenging time. So I did enjoy writing that story. It was the very first one I wrote, and yeah, and because I was thinking of young people, I thought, oh, this is something most of us are familiar with, working with bullying and things like that. Yeah. So I'd say maybe those two are my favorites. Thanks for that question. What is your writing process like? Huh. No, it's not as organized as that. Usually, when I get an idea, I sit with it for a while. I'm not the kind of person to have an idea, sit down, and come up with a story the next day. No, the idea sits with me 2, 3 weeks. I just walk around doing dishes, and from time to time, I reflect on it. And then when I finally find, because I think I'm always looking for how to enter into that story. So when I finally figured it out, that's when I start writing, and I just start from anywhere. I just have a process where I just download whatever comes into my head, just gets on paper, and then I walk away. Then I'll come back. Maybe it's hours later, days later, even a week later, and try to make sense of the story. So that's my process. The dialogue of part of it comes very easily to me. It just seems to flow out, and that's good for me. It works for me. But when I have to do anything that is descriptive, that's a work of labor. I often get up and I'm thinking, okay, today is the day I get to describe, and it is hard. I don't know why. I've struggled with it. Some people don't, but as a writer, for me, that is the toughest part of it. So yeah, so I work in sections. I download the ideas, then I come work through the dialogue, and then I go back and fill in the added layers. Um, yeah, I hope that answers that. Thanks for that question. Mhm. There is another question I'm often asked, and just so you know, when I was writing this, I was writing it as part of my study. So there was a lot of research that I was doing, and because I was working around the area of human rights, most of these human rights violations that you deal with tend to be quite, those are difficult stories to tell. And you might see a lot of that in the stories that I've written. And yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, but there are conversations worth having. And I thought, if I'm writing these are stories that I want my nieces to read, I wanted to be honest about them. There are situations that even they themselves, as Kenyans, would be surprised by what happens in other parts of the country, because Kenya is a large country, and it's very diverse with very diverse cultures. Okay, and next, what surprised me in the publishing process? That I was published in the first place. That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Fremantle Press. Um, Initially when I was looking for a publisher, I was thinking of a Kenyan, because I thought Kenyan stories, maybe Kenyan publisher. So that's where I started, and it was a bit trying because this was happening around about COVID. And but when I sent one day, I was thinking, oh yeah, how about Fremantle Press? They're just down the road from me. But I'm thinking, West Australian stories, but my stories are Kenyan. Who knows? They might like them. So yeah, so it surprised me that that they picked it up, and yeah, that was great, and it's wonderful. Someone loves my earrings. Do you spot the difference? Yes. I saw this advertised somewhere, and I just put in a request for it, and I got the earrings made. It reads, I am the Mao. I wish they were big enough so that, you could tell a story from a mile away, but, it works. Thanks for saying that. Oh, yes. Was there a particular story I found difficult to write? Yes, there's a story in there called Beating. Um, I get quite emotional when I think of Beating. When I was writing it, I had to stop a few times and actually come up for air, because I was inspired by a story of a girl I saw in the news, and she was in her 20s, and she'd started a foundation to help girls in her own community who were being beaten. Beaten is the closest I can get to describing it is, child marriage. So she was rescuing girls. Well, I think just before they hit puberty, around about that age. That group of girls were the ones who were at risk of being beaten. And she started off by rescuing her cousin and then her friends. And before we knew it, she already had this huge foundation. And I was thinking, wow, what a young girl. It's a serious situation. She's coming up against her own community, going, having to do the hard work of struggling to explain to the community, trying to educate the community. But in the meanwhile, she was trying to get these girls away from this really difficult cultural practice. And what made it difficult was my daughter was around about the same age at that time, and I just could not imagine that that could happen to anyone. And what also made it very difficult is I had a young audience in mind, and it's like, how do you talk about situations such as this? They are children, but this is what's happening to children, and they're having to deal with very adult type subjects. And so that wasn't easy to write at all from an emotional level, and also because that is not my community. And I just wanted to respect that a community has a right to practice its culture, but at the same time there are rights that are being violated for the individual children. So yeah, that was really difficult. But I do enjoy reading it. I think I think it's a good story to read. It is quite informative. At the same time, it can be it just helps us understand that life is not the same for everyone. And while girls around the world, most girls around the world are free to play and do as they just have fun with their friends, there's some who are struggling. I think that's a reality for many of us. I mean, a reality we must accept or must confront at some point. Thank you. Okay. Oh yeah. So if I go back to thinking about my research, looking at what human rights are and how I could explore fiction for young people, and how I could promote human rights awareness. That was a difficult journey to make, because there were so many difficult situations I had to confront, but then I had to make reading a happy moment. I remember my supervisor saying, you must think of the reader, take care of the reader. And that was something I walked away with. So in my writing, I've always tried to think of that. What am I writing? Who am I writing for? And even if I have a difficult situation, how do I take care of my reader? I have to be, needed to be a bit sensitive and just write in a way that I can still communicate without bringing harm. Okay. Yeah, somebody says, as they say, everyone wants to see themselves in a book. Hopefully, they, yes. Yeah, it's just nice to have different sorts of stories. I was in the library the other day, and I just like to look through to see what stories are available for young people, who's telling the stories, how diverse the stories can be. Because I do love a good story, and I just love learning about other cultures as well. Yeah. How did it feel to hold the book in my hand? Amazing, purely amazing. In fact, when I first went into Fremantle Press to pick up the book, I saw it on the shelf and I just grabbed it. And for me, I just had that moment. It's like, wow, it is a book. It is, all the thoughts that were sitting on my computer is bound in a beautiful book. And how amazing is that cover? Thank you, Fremantle Press, for doing that, for finding the right fit for my story. It just makes me want to pick it up every single time I see it. So thanks for that. I've also been asked how might the story have been different if I'd chosen to write a memoir instead. I don't think I have a good answer for that, but one of the beauties of writing a fiction is, I can be free to explore my imagination. If I was writing a memoir, I'd have to worry about being accurate and things like that. But this was just, it is fun to play around with fiction, to try and draw out stories, even if mine are based on, some of my stories are based on, real life situations or what's happening with different cultures, what I see in other cultures within Kenya. Yeah, it was fun to just explore that and, just be able to just to have a go at it and see if I can place myself in the shoes of a 15-year-old. It's been a while since I was 15, but it was some good experience there, some good learning lessons. That's a tough question. Do I have an idea for my next book? Is it too soon? Can I say it's a bit too soon? I'm just loving my book. I'm just embracing it all the time. And yes, I might have some ideas at the back of my mind, but for now, I just want to see how this goes. Sometimes it might develop a life of its own. Who knows? But I'm enjoying reading it. I'm enjoying holding it as a book. I'm enjoying listening to what others are saying. My family are loving this. My mom particularly. And at this point, I just want to just say thank you to my mom. She was incredible. When I was growing up, the reason why, actually, I think this is the reason why I'm writing today. My mom would buy me books. I first fell in love with reading because my teacher gave me a copy of Famous Five. Now that's how African my reading began. if you and I read the first book, and after that I'd go to my mom's like, I need to read another one. I need the next one, and she just kept buying them. I look back and I just wonder, how did she even afford that? I mean, these were sacrifices she was making. So yeah, so it is just yeah, she's been there for me, and she's been very supportive, and she is so glad about it. She keeps saying, wow, I knew you could do this. So yeah, so I've been very proud of that. Is there one story is there one story that resonated more than the others? There's 11 stories in there. I'm not sure if there's one particular one, but I did. Oh no. Oh, that's a tough one to no. I think they're all special in their own ways. Like I said, there are those that are difficult to tell. So because I took so much care in telling them, they sort of stuck with me. Then the stories that I just had fun with. There's one called Of Hair and Goats. That was interesting because it reminded me of growing up and struggling with school rules, especially rules regarding hair, and just to find that it is still going on. 35 years later, same fight the young girls are still having. So yeah, so that was interesting. Um, yes, I can say that. In fact, when I think of that, I call it a sacrifice. So I keep saying, Mom, our book is out. Thanks for that comment. Someone is asking, what am I currently reading? I've got a stack of books here. I am reading. Okay, I just finished reading that, Under the Udala Trees. Nigerian writer. I try to read a lot of African writing. The bulk of the writing I've done is, for the most part, has been Western culture. So I'm trying to read I'm not trying to read a lot more African stories that were not available to me when I'm growing up. It's just one of the things I've been very pleased to see. There's been this growth uh, in African stories that are being told by Africans. So that's been a new area for me, and I'm just trying to see what young people, what the young Africans are writing about. I grew up at an age where we had the likes of Chinua Achebe, and that generation of writers. We grew up on that kind of literature. So yes, I'm very excited about the young people coming up and what they're reading. So that's another one called Black Ass by Igoni. This is an interesting story of uh, a Nigerian man who wakes up, in a European body, in a white body, and it's like, whoa, different world, different culture. And I mean, he writes with a lot of humor, so that's fun. I like to go back to older books. The Little Shop of Kabul, that was fun to do. And I have a heap of others that I'm yet to get started on. So thank you. What inspires me to keep writing? Oh, what can I say? Oh, I'm not sure. I'm looking at my bunch of books and just wondering which one inspires me the most. But I like books that are around human rights issues, social justice issues. Maybe because that's what I'm passionate about. I like stories uh, that bring me close to people who are so far away. I recently read a young adult book called something Unbound, Amal Unbound. It's about a young girl who has to go and live with a certain family because her own family owed money to another family, and it's really almost the same equivalent to slavery. And yeah, that's a difficult one because I am aware that such issues are still going on right around the world. Young people, young girls particularly, they're very vulnerable and they're having to work in places so far away from home just so they can make a living or because their own families owed money. So yeah, so that is yeah, that's challenging for me, but they also inspire me because I feel like it's just talking about what's happening in our day to day. We live in relative comfort here in Australia, and sometimes it's easy to you can lose sight of what is important and lose sight of others who are so far away from us but are doing it tough. Um, why do you think okay, why do I think a YA audience is the right audience for these stories? Young people are incredible. They have this capacity for compassion. I watch my daughter and I watch her friends, and she's got a diverse group of friends, and it is just amazing how they work so well together and how they do life together, and how they are capable of caring for people who are so far, for situations that are so far from them. So yeah, young people inspire me that way, and I think we shouldn't underestimate what they're capable of, and shouldn't underestimate how much compassion and their ability to just want to reach across and be supportive. So they do inspire me, and I've worked a lot with young people, and so when I say that with confidence. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the questions. There's an expression in my book called on the blurb. There's something that says these stories are about Ubuntu. I just thought I'd just take this moment and explain that a little bit because I've been asked about it. It's not a concept that is easy to explain or to define, but it has to do with oneness. It has to do with humanity, and it talks about how we are so tied up together that I can only be because you are. If I was to contrast this with a Western culture where a lot of rights is all about the rights of the individual, for us as Africans, it's about who we are as a community, and therefore to grow, we have to grow as a community. To thrive, we have to thrive as a community. And there's still so many communities that still own land together. They still have so many things. They still work together in so many ways. So Ubuntu comes from that sense of togetherness. And if you have to thrive, if you have to survive, if you have to do whatever you have to do, it works better if you work with others. Do I have a favorite place you like to write? No, I write in my can I call it? Not, yeah, not quite my living room. Just this space where I'm in. I'm just sitting opposite, just opposite the kitchen. I've set up my desk. I've got a fair bit of space. So yeah, I'm not the kind of person to write at a cafe or or by the beach or what. I can do my thinking there, but when I have to write, I think I like to write in a familiar place with everything around because I'm quite a messy writer. I'll have notes spread out the place, so I work better when 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 in a place where I feel like I have control over. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, keep the questions coming. Okay, I have another question. Somebody's asked me, how has being a teacher informed me or helped me with my writing? And I'd say it's really more helping me to be aware of who I'm writing for, being more aware of my audience. I have drawn a lot from my students. I remember once reading, I don't know if some of you are familiar with the story called Pavana. It's an old book. I mean, I did this almost, I don't know, 8 or so years ago. And I was working with a group of students who were very reluctant readers. They were quite hesitant. When I introduced the book, they weren't so keen on it. They didn't like reading anyway. But I wanted something easy for them. They were a year 11 group, but I wanted something fairly easy, but something that I thought was quite meaty. So when I introduced this book at first, it was like, oh. But as the weeks went on, because I was reading it out to them, and then we talk about it. It's about a girl who has it's about a girl who had to go and pretend to be a boy so that she could survive because she comes from a culture where girls aren't allowed out unless accompanied by an adult. I mean, unless accompanied by a male relative, and they were working against the Taliban. So, so it helped the group understand because yeah, in the process of her trying to do all of that, we began to think about refugees and asylum seekers and how they felt. And they started off by being very, quite vocal, quite against the whole idea of asylum seekers, because that was always in the news as, and this was the era of stop the boats, stop the boats. But by the time we finished reading that story, I noticed that their choice of words, they seem to have softened. And I just realized these stories are powerful. They help people just understand what others are going through. And by the end of the 3 weeks, just watching this, especially this group of boys, express words of sympathy or empathy towards this girl, understanding that, yeah, people don't just run away from their homes because they have nothing, they're looking for better life. It's because they're trying to survive. So I do know there's power. There's power in fiction, and there's power in these stories about human stories that can soften a heart. So what advice do I have for someone wanting to publish a book? Patience, I think, is the biggest one. Once you have your story, I think just keep trying. Don't give up. Try, try, try. There are different sorts of publishers all over the world, and I think there's a publisher for every story. So if your story is rejected by one publisher, try another one. I think eventually things will come to pass. Okay, thank you so much for that. Okay, I think I can have one more comment. No, I think that's it. Okay, thank you so much, Caroline. Thanks so much. That was quite interesting and quite an experience. And I'm new to the whole social media thing, so this has just been an incredible moment. Just sitting here and feeling like, whoa, okay, this is what social media is about. So I'm excited to be learning. I'm learning every new day, and thanks, guys. Thanks for being so supportive. It makes a big difference.